They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when your own blood is the one holding the knife? Picture this. I'm standing in front of 50 people at my mother's anniversary party, being called a freeloader by the woman who gave birth to me while her husband, my stepfather, literally points at the door like I'm garbage that needs taking out. Humiliating? Absolutely. Shocking? You have no idea. But here's where it gets interesting. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't do what they expected. Instead, I smiled and asked if everyone wanted to see what was inside the gift box I'd brought. That silver-wrapped box sitting on the table, it didn't just contain something worth $450,000. It held the paperwork and the truth that would expose every lie they'd told about me for the past decade. Karma was finally ready to collect what they owed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There I stood, frozen in the middle of that glittering anniversary party, with 50 pairs of eyes locked on me like I was some kind of circus act. My own mother, Margaret, the woman who gave birth to me, had just called me a freeloader in front of everyone. The champagne glasses stopped clinking, the laughter died down, and suddenly the only sound in that entire ballroom was my heart pounding against my ribs. Richard, my stepfather, stepped forward with that smug grin plastered across his face and pointed toward the door like I was trash he'd been waiting to take out. The humiliation burned through my chest like acid, but here's the thing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or beg or make a scene the way they probably expected. Instead, something cold and sharp settled into my bones, something that felt a lot like clarity. I'd spent years being treated like I didn't matter, like I was some kind of burden they'd been forced to carry. But right then, standing there with everyone watching, I realized I held something they didn't know about. Something that would flip this entire nightmare on its head. My mother's voice cut through the silence again, dripping with fake concern mixed with venom. "Sweetheart, you've embarrassed us enough. Just leave the gift and go." She said it so sweetly, like she was doing me a favor, like she was the victim here. The betrayal stung worse than any slap across the face could have. This was the woman who was supposed to protect me, supposed to love me unconditionally, and she'd just thrown me to the wolves for social points. Richard crossed his arms, playing the role of enforcer like he'd been rehearsing it for years. "We've been more than patient with you, but there's a limit to charity," he announced loud enough for the back row to hear. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering behind their hands, others looking away like they couldn't bear to witness what was happening. Shamed and humiliated. That's exactly what they wanted me to feel. And honestly, part of me did feel it, that burning shame creeping up my neck. But then I looked down at the gift box in my hands, the one I'd wrapped so carefully just days before, and I felt something shift. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth, small at first, then wider. "You know what?" I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. "I think everyone here deserves to see what's inside this box before I leave, because it's not just a gift, it's the paperwork and the truth." My mother's face went pale, just for a second, like she sensed something was off. The truth was sitting right there in my hands, wrapped in silver paper with a white bow, and I hadn't even opened it yet. Revenge wasn't something I'd planned when I walked through those doors tonight. I'd actually come here hoping for something different, something that looked like reconciliation, or maybe just basic human decency. But payback? Well, sometimes payback finds you when you least expect it. And I was about to show them exactly what justice looked like when you've been backstabbed by your own blood. Let me take you back to where this whole mess started. 17 years ago, when I was just 16 and my world collapsed in a single phone call. My dad, the only person who ever truly saw me, died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning. I remember the police officer's voice on the other end, calm and procedural, like he was reading from a script, while my insides were being ripped apart. The funeral was a blur of black dresses and fake sympathy. But what happened after? That's when I saw my mother Margaret's true colors bleed through. I thought grief looked like tears and silence and maybe not getting out of bed for days. But my mom? She was packing up Dad's things before the casket was even in the ground. I'd come downstairs to find her shoving his clothes into garbage bags, humming under her breath like she was spring cleaning. "We need to move forward, honey," she said without even looking at me, like my father was just clutter she needed to clear out. The betrayal of watching her erase him so quickly. It felt like losing him twice. Then came the insurance money, and suddenly my mother wasn't grieving anymore. She was celebrating. $230,000, she announced one night over takeout Chinese food, like we'd won the lottery instead of lost everything that mattered. "This is our chance to start over, to really live," she said, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen since before Dad got sick. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. While I was still crying myself to sleep every night, she was planning shopping trips and talking about new beginnings. The guilt I felt for resenting her ate me alive at first. I told myself maybe this was her way of coping, that everyone handles loss differently. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't grief, this was relief. She'd been waiting for this, waiting for her chance to reinvent herself without the weight of a sick husband holding her back. Karma, I thought bitterly, would catch up with her eventually. But I was young and stupid and still believed the universe kept score. Within 6 months, she'd met Richard Thornton at some charity gala she had no business attending. He was everything my dad wasn't: flashy, loud, obsessed with status and appearances. They were engaged within 3 months, married within 6. I watched from the sidelines as she transformed into someone I didn't recognize. Someone who laughed too loud at Richard's terrible jokes and pretended our old life never existed. My father's memory got buried under designer handbags and country club memberships. The wedding was small but expensive, just the way Richard liked things. I wore a dress my mother picked out without asking my opinion, stood where I was told to stand, smiled when I was supposed to smile. Nobody asked if I was okay with any of this. Nobody asked if I wanted a new family or a new house or a new life. I was just expected to go along with it, to be grateful even. And that's when I started to understand. I wasn't part of her fresh start. I was a reminder of everything she was trying to leave behind. Moving into Richard's house felt like walking into a museum where I wasn't allowed to touch anything. Everything was white marble and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where you're scared to breathe too loud. My mother gave me the grand tour with this forced enthusiasm, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me that this was going to be amazing. Then she opened the door to what would be my new room. And I mean, calling it a room was generous. It was basically a converted storage closet at the end of the hallway, barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. "It's cozy," my mother chirped, avoiding my eyes. Meanwhile, Derek, Richard's 17-year-old son, had a bedroom suite that was literally 3 times the size of my entire space. He had his own bathroom, a walk-in closet, a gaming setup that probably cost more than my dad's funeral. The family drama playing out was so obvious it was almost funny, except I was the punchline. Derek looked at me like I was an inconvenience, something his father had to tolerate because he wanted to sleep with my mother. The inequality wasn't even subtle. It was shoved in my face every single day. Derek got a brand new BMW for his 18th birthday, metallic blue with custom leather seats. I got a gift card to Target for $25. He talked about his college fund like it was a done deal, already planning his future at some prestigious university. I couldn't even bring up community college without Richard rolling his eyes like I was asking for a kidney. Self-worth? I watched mine shrink a little more each day. Dinner became this twisted theater where I played the role of the forgotten child. They'd talk about Derek's achievements, his future, his potential, while I sat there pushing food around my plate. "Derek's professor says he has real talent," Richard would brag. "We're so proud of our boy." Our boy. Never our kids or our children. Just Derek. I was the freeloader they tolerated, the extra mouth to feed, the reminder that my mother came with baggage. The backstabbed feeling settled deep in my chest and made a home there. My mother went along with all of it, never once standing up for me or questioning why her own daughter was being treated like hired help. She'd transformed completely, morphing into this version of herself that prioritized status over her own child. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes with this mix of guilt and irritation, like she knew what was happening was wrong but couldn't be bothered to fix it. That's when I realized she'd chosen them. She'd chosen this new life, this new family, and I simply didn't fit into the picture she was trying to paint. Christmas that first year was particularly brutal. Derek opened present after present. Designer clothes, the latest tech, concert tickets, cash. My pile consisted of a sweater 2 sizes too big and a book I'd never read. "We didn't want to spoil you," Richard said with that condescending smile. Dignity became something I had to fight for daily, something they tried to strip away with every unequal gesture. I started spending more time in my closet room, door closed, headphones on, drowning out the sound of their perfect little family downstairs. I knew I couldn't survive much longer in that house, but I had no idea how bad things were about to get. I was 3 months away from turning 18 when I finally gathered the courage to ask about college. I'd been working part-time at a grocery store, saving every penny I could, but it wasn't nearly enough for tuition and books and everything else. My guidance counselor had pulled me aside, told me I had potential, that I could get into decent schools if I just had the financial support. So one Sunday morning, I walked into the kitchen where Richard and my mother were having coffee, and I asked, politely, carefully, if they could help me the way they were helping Derek. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard set down his newspaper and looked at me like I'd just asked him to set himself on fire. "Help you?" he repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. My mother stared into her coffee cup like the answer was floating somewhere in there. "Derek is our investment," Richard continued, leaning back in his chair. "He's going to take over the family business someday. You? You're not even my responsibility." The words hit me like a slap, each syllable designed to remind me of my place in their hierarchy. My mother finally spoke up, but not to defend me, to agree with him. "Sweetheart, we've given you a roof over your head and food to eat. That's more than enough." I couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. This was the woman who used to read me bedtime stories, who used to tell me I could be anything I wanted. Now she was calling basic survival more than enough, while her stepson got handed everything on a silver platter. The betrayal burned worse than anything Richard could say because it came from her. "You'll be fine," Richard added, waving his hand dismissively. "Get a job, take out loans like everyone else. We're not running a charity here." There it was again, that word, charity. Like I was some kind of beggar instead of a kid who'd lost her father and gotten stuck with a mother who cared more about country club memberships than her own daughter's future. Cheated. That's exactly how I felt. Cheated out of a real family, cheated out of support, cheated out of the life I should have had if my dad were still alive. Then came the real gut punch. "Actually," Richard said, standing up and straightening his ridiculous monogrammed robe, "we've been meaning to talk to you about this. When you turn 18 in June, we think it's time you found your own place. You're an adult after all. Time to stand on your own 2 feet. My mother nodded along like a puppet, not even having the decency to look ashamed. They were kicking me out, planning it, discussing it, probably marking it on their calendar like it was something to look forward to. I stood there feeling humiliated and shamed, my hands shaking at my sides. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them feel even a fraction of the pain they were causing me. But another part, the part that would eventually save me, went cold and calculating. "Okay," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "I understand." And I did understand, finally. I understood that I was completely alone, that these people would never be my family, and that vengeance wasn't something you plan. It's something you earn through survival. I walked back to my closet room knowing everything was about to change. I just didn't know how yet. 3 days after that devastating kitchen conversation, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I was lying in my tiny room staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how I was going to survive on my own in 3 months. But something made me pick up. And on the other end was a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Madison? It's your Aunt Patricia, your dad's sister." My heart stopped. We'd lost touch after the funeral, and honestly, I thought she'd forgotten about me like everyone else had. "I need to see you," she said, her voice urgent but warm. "There's something your father left for you, something your mother doesn't know about." The truth, those 2 words sent chills down my spine. We met at a diner 2 towns over, far enough that nobody from Richard's social circle would spot us. Patricia looked older than I remembered, but her eyes had that same kindness my dad used to have. She slid a manila envelope across the table, her hands trembling slightly. "Your father knew," she whispered. "He knew your mother couldn't be trusted with his legacy." Inside that envelope was everything. A bank statement showing a savings account in my name with $47,000, money my dad had been putting away for years, kept separate from the insurance payout. It was an account my mom never had access to, set up before the marriage, with Patricia as the backup contact. There were birthday cards he'd written in advance, one for each year until I turned 25, each one sealed and dated. And then there was the letter, handwritten on his old stationery, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. "My darling Madison, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I've watched your mother change over the years, watched her priorities shift. I don't trust her to protect you the way you deserve." The shocking revelation hit me like a truck. My dad had known. He'd seen through her before I even could, and he'd made sure I'd be okay. "He made me promise," Patricia explained, tears streaming down her face. "He made me swear I wouldn't tell you until you really needed it, until you were old enough to understand. He was worried she'd manipulate you, make you give her the money." Karma, I thought. My father's love reaching through death to save me. This was justice in its purest form, the universe finally balancing the scales. Patricia told me everything. How my mother had lied to her after the funeral, claiming there was no life insurance, no savings, nothing. How she'd cut off my dad's entire family to hide her deception. She wanted a clean slate, Patricia said bitterly. She didn't want anyone around who remembered who she used to be, who your father really was. The infidelity wasn't just romantic, it was emotional, moral. She'd betrayed every value my dad stood for, every sacrifice he'd made, and she'd done it while playing the grieving widow. I sat in that diner booth for hours, reading and rereading my father's words, letting the weight of his protection sink in. He'd given me more than money. He'd given me freedom, choices, a future that didn't depend on Richard's mercy or my mother's guilt. "What are you going to do?" Patricia asked finally. I looked up at her, and for the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't despair. "I'm going to get out," I said. "I'm going to build the life Dad wanted for me. And someday, when I'm ready, I'm going to make sure they know exactly what they lost." Reclaiming my dignity started right there, in that moment, with my father's letter pressed against my chest and a plan beginning to form in my mind. On my 18th birthday, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and left before dawn. There was no dramatic goodbye, no note on the kitchen counter, no final confrontation. I just disappeared like smoke, catching a bus to New York City with my father's money tucked safely in a new bank account and his letters hidden in my backpack. My mother called twice that first week, leaving voicemails that ranged from fake concern to thinly veiled relief. I deleted them without listening to the end. Richard didn't call at all, which told me everything I needed to know about how much I'd mattered. New York was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I found a tiny studio apartment in Queens that cost way more than it should have, but it was mine. Every cramped square foot belonged to me and nobody else. I got a job waiting tables at a busy restaurant in Midtown, working doubles most days, my feet aching and my back screaming. But here's the thing. I was free. Every dollar I earned was mine. Every decision was mine. Every moment belonged to me. Payback wasn't about revenge yet. It was about proving I could survive without them, that I wasn't the freeloader they'd labeled me. I enrolled in community college, taking night classes in design and business while working days. Sleep became optional, coffee became survival, and somewhere in that chaos, I found myself. My professors noticed my work, started giving me extra projects, connecting me with internships. By 20, I'd landed a position at a small design firm in Manhattan, barely paid but bursting with opportunity. I worked harder than anyone else, stayed later, volunteered for the projects nobody wanted. Dignity came from building something real, something that had nothing to do with my mother's money or Richard's connections. The years blurred together in the best possible way. At 22, I became a freelance designer with my own client list. At 24, I was hired as a lead designer at a prestigious firm, creating brands for companies I used to only read about. At 26, I launched my own design studio with a business partner I'd met through networking. We started small, just the two of us in a shared office space. But within 2 years, we had 12 employees and clients across 3 continents. Self-worth wasn't something I had to fight for anymore. It was something I'd built with my own 2 hands. I never contacted my mother during those 10 years. Not once. Patricia and I stayed close. She was the family I chose, the one who actually showed up. She'd visit my tiny apartment, then my bigger apartment, then my townhouse, watching me grow and succeed with pride that felt genuine. "Your father would be so proud," she'd say, and I'd believe her because I could feel it too. This wasn't luck or inheritance or someone else's money. This was mine. Every client I landed, every employee I hired, every award I won was proof that I didn't need them, that I'd never needed them. But here's what nobody tells you about success born from betrayal. It doesn't erase the anger. It just gives it focus. I'd built an incredible life, sure, but there was still this raw wound that never quite healed. Sometimes I'd see mothers and daughters shopping together, laughing, and I'd feel it all over again. That ache of what I'd lost, what had been stolen from me. Then one day, 10 years after I'd walked out of that house, an envelope arrived at my office. Cream-colored, expensive stationery, my mother's handwriting on the front. Inside was an invitation to her and Richard's 10th wedding anniversary party. And just like that, everything I'd buried came rushing back to the surface, sharp and hungry and ready for justice. I stared at that invitation for 3 days straight, turning it over in my hands like it might explode. 10 years of marriage to Richard, and suddenly they wanted me there. The timing was too convenient, too calculated. I did some digging, called a few people who still moved in those circles, checked social media, pieced together the puzzle. Turns out Richard's business had hit some rough patches, and my mother's social standing wasn't what it used to be. Richard needed investors to renew a credit line, and the reunited family story was part of the pitch. They needed something, and apparently I was it. The audacity was almost impressive. "Don't go," Patricia warned me over coffee. "They don't deserve to see what you've become." But that's exactly why I wanted to go. Because they didn't deserve it. Because they'd written me off as nothing, and now I was everything they pretended to be. I RSVP'd yes and started planning. Not planning revenge, not exactly. Planning justice. There's a difference, you know? Revenge is messy and emotional. Justice is precise and earned. And after 10 years of silence, I definitely earned this. I decided to bring a gift. Because that's what you do at anniversary parties, right? I spent weeks searching for the perfect thing. Something meaningful. Something that would represent everything I'd become. I finally found it. A beautiful apartment in Manhattan, fully paid off, worth about $450,000. It was an investment property I'd purchased 6 months earlier, and I'd been planning to rent it out. But looking at that invitation, a different idea formed. What if I gave it to them? What if I showed them exactly how successful their freeloader had become? The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, the daughter they'd kicked out with nothing, ready to hand them a gift worth more than they'd ever given me in my entire childhood. Part of me wondered if this was stupid, if I was being too generous to people who didn't deserve my trash, let alone my treasure. But another part knew. This was the ultimate power move. Let them see what they'd thrown away. Let them choke on their own judgment. Let them realize that every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment they made me feel small had been catastrophically wrong. I had the deed transferred, had it professionally wrapped in silver paper with a white bow. Inside the box, I also placed my father's letter, a copy, not the original, and a brief note of my own explaining where the money had come from, how I'd built my life, what I'd accomplished. I wanted them to know it wasn't luck or some rich boyfriend or an inheritance they didn't know about. I wanted them to know I'd done this despite them, in spite of them, as a direct result of walking away from their toxicity. The night before the party, I tried on 5 different dresses before settling on something elegant but understated. Successful without being flashy, confident without being aggressive. I practiced what I'd say, how I'd act, imagining different scenarios. Would my mother cry? Would Richard apologize? Would they even recognize me after all these years? I couldn't believe I was actually doing this, walking back into the lion's den carrying a gift that probably cost more than their car. But as I looked at myself in the mirror, gift box in hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to close this chapter. Ready to show them that family betrayal doesn't destroy you if you refuse to let it. The anniversary party was being held at some exclusive country club that probably cost more for one night than most people's yearly salary. I pulled up in my car, not flashy, but nice, the kind that whispers success instead of screaming it, and watched guests filter in wearing their designer labels like armor. My mother had always been obsessed with appearances, and apparently 10 years with Richard had only amplified that obsession. I took a deep breath, grabbed the silver gift box, and walked through those doors like I owned the place. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, I felt eyes on me. Some people didn't recognize me at first. I'd gone from awkward 18-year-old to confident 28-year-old woman. But my mother spotted me immediately, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, then something that looked almost like panic. She whispered something to Richard, who turned and stared at me like I was a ghost he thought he'd successfully buried. I smiled, polite, calm, completely in control, and made my way toward them through the crowd of 50 or so guests. "Madison," my mother said, her voice doing that fake sweet thing she'd perfected over the years. "What a surprise." She didn't hug me, didn't even move toward me, just stood there clutching Richard's arm like I might attack. I set the gift box on the table beside me and looked around at all these people I didn't know, all these witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. "Congratulations on 10 years, I said evenly. "I brought you something." The shocking tension in the room was palpable. People had stopped their conversations to watch this reunion. That's when my mother made her move, and it was so perfectly calculated I almost admired it. She turned to the crowd with this practiced expression of maternal concern, mixed with disappointment. "Everyone, this is my daughter Madison. We haven't seen her in 10 years because, well," she paused for effect. "She's had a difficult time finding her footing in the world. We've tried to help, but sometimes you have to let people learn their own lessons." The humiliation tactic was obvious. Paint me as the failure, herself as the patient, long-suffering mother. Richard jumped in right on cue, playing his part in their little performance. "It's unfortunate, really. We gave her every opportunity, but she chose to walk away from family, chose to struggle on her own rather than accept our guidance." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to make sure their narrative was the one that stuck. I felt dozens of eyes on me, judging, pitying, buying into their lies. "We even offered to help with college," my mother added, her voice dripping with false regret. But she was too proud to accept. I stood there, letting them dig their own graves, watching them perform this elaborate fiction for their audience. They were so confident, so sure they'd controlled the narrative. Richard pointed at the gift box like it was evidence of my desperation. "Look, she's brought us something. How sweet." The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Why don't you just leave it there and run along, Madison? I'm sure you have somewhere to be. The dismissal was clear, the message obvious. You don't belong here. You never did. Now leave before you embarrass yourself further. That's when I picked up the box, smiled wider, and said the words that would change everything. Actually, I think everyone here deserves to see what's inside first. I opened that box slowly, deliberately, letting the anticipation build in the room. The silver paper crinkled as I peeled it back, and I could feel my mother's anxiety radiating off her in waves. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a leather portfolio. I pulled it out and opened it to reveal the deed to the Manhattan apartment, along with a professional appraisal document showing its current market value, $450,000. The gasps from the crowd were immediate and satisfying. This is the key and deed to a fully paid-off apartment in Manhattan, I announced, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. Richard's face went from smug to confused to something resembling shock in about 3 seconds flat. "What kind of joke is this?" he sputtered, but his eyes were already scanning the documents, looking for proof that this was real. My mother reached for the papers with shaking hands, her carefully constructed mask starting to crack. "Madison, how did you—" She couldn't even finish the sentence. The truth was hitting her in waves. Her failure daughter, her freeloader, her embarrassment had just casually revealed a gift worth almost $500,000. "I was going to give this to you," I said calmly, watching their faces cycle through disbelief and desperate hope. "I came here tonight, thinking maybe, after all these years, we could start fresh. Maybe you'd changed. Maybe you'd want to actually know who I'd become instead of who you decided I was." I let that sink in for a moment, watching my mother's eyes fixate on that deed like it was the Holy Grail. Richard was doing mental math. I could see it. Calculating what this meant, what they could do with it, how this changed their financial situation. But here's the thing about revenge. It's not about the money. It's about the moment of realization. "But then you called me a failure in front of all these people," I continued, my voice still steady. "You lied about offering to help with college. You painted this narrative where you're the generous parents and I'm the ungrateful child. You humiliated me, again, just like you did when I was 18. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others fascinated, all of them riveted by the family drama unfolding like a soap opera in real time. I pulled out my father's letter then, the copy I'd brought specifically for this purpose. This is a letter my dad wrote before he died. He knew, Mom. He knew you couldn't be trusted with his legacy, so he made sure I'd be taken care of. That $47,000 he left me? That's what I used to build my entire life. I worked my way through college, started my own design firm, invested wisely, and bought this apartment 6 months ago." I held up the deed again, watching the shock ripple through my mother's features. "Everything you said about me struggling, about me failing? It was all lies, backstabbed by my own mother, even after a decade of silence." Richard's businessman instincts kicked in, and I watched him shift gears, suddenly trying to play nice. "Madison, sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your mother was just—" But I cut him off. "There's no misunderstanding, Richard. You both made it perfectly clear what you think of me. You made it clear 10 years ago when you kicked me out, and you made it clear again tonight when you tried to humiliate me in front of your friends." I carefully placed everything back in the box and closed it, the snap of the lid echoing in the silent room. Payback, I realized, wasn't about destroying them. It was about them destroying themselves while everyone watched. I wasn't done yet. I'd asked the event coordinator earlier to connect my laptop to the venue's AV system, just in case. Now I pulled out my phone and pulled up the documents I'd prepared. Since we're talking about truth in front of witnesses, let's discuss the $230,000 in life insurance you received when Dad died, Mom. Remember that? The money you said was for our fresh start? The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. I've done some math over the years, Want to know how much of that money went toward my care, my education, my future? Zero. Not a single dollar. Richard tried to interrupt, but I kept going, my voice louder now, fueled by 10 years of silence. You bought a new wardrobe, went on vacation to Europe, renovated your bedroom, and invested in Richard's business. Meanwhile, I was sleeping in a closet and wearing clothes from thrift stores. You told everyone you were taking care of me, playing the devoted mother. But the truth is, you saw me as dead weight from the moment Dad's body was cold. The shocking revelation was rippling through the crowd. I could see people exchanging glances, whispering, reassessing everything they thought they knew. Then, like a gift from the universe, someone spoke up from the crowd. Eleanor Brooks, a woman I vaguely recognized from my mother's social circle, stepped forward. "Is this true, Margaret?" she asked my mother, her voice sharp. "Because I remember you crying to me about how difficult it was raising a teenage daughter alone, how much money you were spending on her, how grateful we should all be that we weren't in your situation. You fundraised for single mothers at our charity gala using your story." The betrayal in Eleanor's voice was clear. She'd been lied to, manipulated, used. My mother tried to salvage the situation, tears springing to her eyes on command. "Eleanor, you don't understand. Madison was difficult. She was angry. But Eleanor cut her off with a raised hand. "I think we understand perfectly well, Margaret. I think we've all been played." Other guests started nodding, putting pieces together, remembering conversations and appeals for sympathy that now looked like calculated manipulation. My mother's carefully constructed social image was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I pulled out the letter again, my father's words in his own handwriting. My dad wrote this 2 months before he died. He was sick but lucid, worried about what would happen to me. Listen to this part. "I've watched Margaret become someone I don't recognize. She cares more about appearances than authenticity, more about status than family. I don't trust her to put Madison's needs first, so I'm making arrangements she can't touch." My voice cracked reading his words, genuine emotion breaking through my controlled facade. He knew, and he tried to protect me, and even from the grave, he did a better job than you ever did while you were standing right next to me. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear. My mother was crying real tears now. Not sad ones, but angry, cornered, exposed ones. "You have no right," she hissed at me, her mask finally slipping completely. "Coming here after all these years, embarrassing us, telling lies." But Eleanor interrupted again. "They're not lies, though, are they, Margaret? We can all see that now. The question is, how many other stories have you manipulated?" The public shaming was complete, thorough, and absolutely devastating. Justice, I thought, sometimes looks like the truth spoken in front of the right witnesses. And karma? Karma looks like watching someone reap exactly what they've sown while 50 people bear witness. My mother's tears shifted gears the moment she processed what she was losing. The anger melted into desperation, and suddenly she was reaching for me with trembling hands. "Madison, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your mother. We can fix this. We can start over." Her eyes kept darting between my face and the gift box, and I could see the calculation happening in real time. How much that apartment was worth, how it could solve their problems, how badly she needed it. "Give us another chance," she pleaded, her voice breaking in that practiced way that used to make me feel guilty. Richard joined in, suddenly all charm and reasonableness. "Your mother's right. Family is family, and we've all said and done things we regret. Let's put the past behind us." He gestured at the box like it was already theirs, like my forgiveness came with a price tag they were willing to pay now that they knew what I was worth. "You came here with that gift for a reason, Madison. You wanted reconciliation. Well, here we are, ready to reconcile." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. They thought I was still that desperate 18-year-old who would take any scrap of affection they threw my way. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw nothing but greed and panic where love should have been. You had chances, I said quietly, picking up the gift box and holding it against my chest. You had 18 years of chances when I was growing up. You had the chance when Dad died and I needed you most. You had the chance when I asked for help with college. You had the chance to reach out literally any time in the past 10 years. My voice got stronger with each sentence, years of pain crystallizing into clarity. But you didn't take any of those chances because you didn't care. That's not fair, my mother cried, genuine desperation creeping into her voice now. I did my best. I was grieving. I was trying to rebuild my life. I cut her off with a laugh that came out harsher than I intended. You were grieving. Mom, you packed up Dad's clothes before his funeral. You celebrated his insurance money like you'd won the lottery. You replaced him with Richard in less than a year and erased every trace of him from your life. That's not grief. That's relief. The truth hung in the air like smoke, and I watched it choke her. Richard tried one more time, his business instincts kicking in. What do you want, Madison? An apology? Fine, we're sorry. We made mistakes. We see that now. But throwing away a chance at family over old wounds. I stopped him with a raised hand. I don't want your apology, Richard. And I'm not throwing away family. You did that 10 years ago when you called me a freeloader and kicked me out. I came here tonight to see if you'd changed, to see if maybe there was something worth salvaging. But you proved, in front of all these witnesses, that you're exactly the same people who made my life hell. I tucked the box under my arm and looked around the room at all those faces. Some sympathetic, some uncomfortable. All of them understanding exactly what had just transpired. This gift was meant to be an olive branch, a gesture of goodwill from someone who'd succeeded despite you, not because of you, but you can't even accept it without trying to manipulate me one more time. So here's what's going to happen. I'm keeping this apartment. The deed was never in your name. It never would be. I'm walking out of here with my dignity intact. And you're going to have to live with the fact that you had a daughter who became successful, generous, and kind. Everything you pretended to be. And you lost her because you couldn't see past your own selfishness. Reclaiming my power felt like shedding a weight I'd been carrying for a decade, and as I turned toward the door, I heard my mother's voice one last time, small and broken. Madison, please. But I didn't turn around. Some bridges deserve to burn. The fallout from that party was swift and brutal, though I only heard about it secondhand. Eleanor Brooks, true to her word, started asking questions within their social circle. Other people came forward with stories of my mother's manipulation, charity events where she'd exaggerated struggles, fundraisers where she'd pocketed donations meant for causes, social climbs built on fabricated hardships. Within a month, invitations stopped coming. Within 3 months, Richard's business partnerships started dissolving as people questioned his judgment and character. Derek never reached out either. He'd gotten everything he wanted from them and had no reason to look back. Karma works slowly sometimes, but when it hits, it's thorough. My mother called 17 times in the first week after the party. I didn't answer. She sent emails, letters, even showed up at my office once before security escorted her out. Each message followed the same pattern: anger, then bargaining, then guilt-tripping, then back to anger. You ruined us, one voicemail said. I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed your own mother's life. The infidelity to basic human decency was astounding. Even in her lowest moment, she couldn't take responsibility, couldn't see how she'd engineered her own downfall. I saved the messages, but never responded. Silence, I'd learned, was its own form of boundary. 6 months after the party, I did something that felt like the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. I transferred the deed to that Manhattan apartment to Aunt Patricia. She'd been there when I needed family, had kept my father's promise, had loved me without conditions or calculations. When I told her, she cried. Real tears, the kind that come from genuine emotion, not manipulation. Madison, you don't have to, she started, but I stopped her. I know I don't have to. I want to. You're the family that actually showed up. You're the one who deserves this. Patricia told me later that my mother had tried to contact her too, asking her to talk sense into me to facilitate reconciliation. I told her the truth, Patricia said with satisfaction. I told her that she'd had a daughter who would have given her the world, and she threw it away for country club memberships and a man who valued her as much as she'd valued her own child. She didn't like that very much. The thought of my mother confronting the reality of her choices, seeing the apartment go to someone else, knowing she'd gambled and lost, it didn't make me happy exactly, but it felt right. Like the universe had finally balanced its books. I wish I could say I never thought about them again, that walking out of that party gave me instant peace and closure. The truth is messier than that. Some days I'm angry all over again. Some days I wonder if I should have handled it differently, been the bigger person, offered genuine forgiveness. But then I remember 18-year-old me, sleeping in that closet, being called a burden, watching Derek get everything while I got scraps. I remember the humiliation, the betrayal, the systematic erosion of my self-worth. And I realize I was the bigger person. I survived, I succeeded, I built a life they said I'd never have. My design firm hit 7 figures in revenue last year. I mentor young women who've aged out of foster care or left abusive homes, helping them build careers and self-worth the way my father would have wanted. Patricia and I have dinner every Sunday, a chosen family tradition that means more than any biological connection ever could. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. It's about building something so beautiful, so successful, so undeniably yours, that the people who doubted you have to live with the knowledge of what they missed. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, persistent, and looks like a life well lived despite every obstacle thrown in your way. And dignity? Dignity is knowing when to walk away and never look back. So that's my story. From closet-dwelling freeloader to successful business owner who walked away from toxicity with her head held high and her boundaries firmly in place. But here's what I really want to know. Have you ever been in a situation where family expected you to just forgive and forget, even after years of betrayal? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have given them that apartment? Or would you have done exactly what I did? I'm curious, do you think I was too harsh? Or do you think some people deserve to face the consequences of their actions? Have you ever had to cut off family members for your own mental health and well-being? What's the worst thing a family member has ever said or done to you at a public event? Share your story in the comments because I guarantee you're not alone. And sometimes just knowing other people have survived similar situations makes all the difference. Here's my real question for you. If you had the chance to confront the people who hurt you most, would you take it? Or is walking away in silence the ultimate power move? And when it comes to toxic family members, where do you draw the line between forgiveness and self-protection? I want to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your "I can't believe they actually did that" moments. Comment below and let's have a real conversation about family drama, boundaries, and what justice actually looks like when you've been backstabbed by your own blood. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family dynamics, or if it just gave you that satisfying feeling of watching karma do its job, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We're diving deep into stories about reclaiming self-worth, setting boundaries with toxic people, and finding the courage to choose yourself even when it's hard. These aren't your typical superficial stories. These are real, raw, and brutally honest conversations about the messy reality of family betrayal and personal triumph. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. We've got more stories about people who refused to be victims, who built incredible lives from nothing, and who proved that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything they said you'd never be. So subscribe, turn on those notifications, and join this community of people who understand that family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who you choose, who shows up, and who actually keeps their promises. Let's keep this conversation going because your story matters just as much as mine.